It's happening again. Has to happen. Dexter's coming back, baby! And are we excited? Are you? Am I? You know what? I am. I love these characters. And even though we've had our ups and downs over the years, I love the show Dexter. We all do. That's why you're listening now, right? This is Dissecting Dexter, by the way, a podcast dedicated to the TV series Dexter. So if you've tuned in to hear about the new season of Mayor of Kingstown, you've come to the wrong place. Sorry. Bob over to the Daily DVR podcast to catch that. Little plug there for our friends and previous podcast guests, Heath and Axel. I'm your host, Gareth Watkins, coming to you from a very grey and murky Yorkshire today. Today being the 24th of May 2024, but it's made brighter by a concrete announcement about the new Dexter Origins show, now being announced as being called Original Sin. I'd started prepping a podcast this week, actually, to talk about the previous casting news that we've had. Not news about who, but news about a casting call as they look for actors to play the new and returning characters. I did a Patreon exclusive podcast a few weeks ago talking about it, and this is mostly old news now, but I was going to talk about it a bit on the main feed, plus address some recent listener feedback that would provide some potentially controversial subject matter, something I try not to get bogged down with here. You may have seen my social media posts about Masuka this week. Someone had suggested that by being amused by Masuka's dirty jokes, I was somehow condoning sexual harassment of women. I was going to do a long, reflective spiel about it because it did honestly make me stop and think as to whether I've been too lenient on Vince. Maybe, I don't know, what's the word? A bit flippant in my reaction to his jokes over the years. I work in a robust office where banter gets very crude sometimes, but we know each other well and are comfortable with that kind of humour. So within our group there, it's okay. Although personally for me, there are definitely lines I don't ever cross. I maintain a level of respect to all my colleagues, and it's those values that made me stop and think when I got a pretty scathing iTunes review calling me out. Obviously, I'd never want to offend anyone with comments made during my reviews, and I would certainly apologise if I have ever caused offence. But having canvassed listeners for opinions, it does seem that no one I spoke to has been offended by Masuka, or thought he was sexually harassing anyone, or had any issue with my comments about the show and these moments in the show. The consensus seems to be that Masuka's a good guy, albeit with a crude sense of humour, in an office of friends. I think it was Travis called it the bullpen, who joke with each other. Hell, even Deb gets stuck in with the dirty comments. It'll be interesting to see now if the writers tone him down a bit for the new series. Oh, see, I've gone into a thing about it anyway, and I wasn't going to, but I'm glad for that listener's comments, and I'm sure they're not listening today. But I'm glad that they made the point, even if the review was negative, because it did cause me to think about myself and consider my position on the character and my reaction to things he says. Thanks to those of you who responded when I reached out. Okay, back to the podcast. Firstly, welcome everyone, new listeners and old. If you're a new listener, thank you for checking out my little podcast. I've been doing these now for 14 years, starting with a rewatch of season 1. We've jumped around a bit as we've covered the newer seasons as they aired, and then going back to the old shows during the hiatuses. Hiati? What's the plural for hiatus? Anyway, we are still getting there, and I'm towards the end of season 3 now. For anyone listening who has not seen every season of Dexter yet, including New Blood, please tread lightly here. We're going to be talking a bit about the new prequel series and may touch on events from previous seasons. I don't want to spoil anyone, so bear that in mind if you keep listening. Second thing, I do this podcast for the love of it, and I seek no personal gain, apart from the genuine pleasure of interacting with you guys, as I've said many times before. I do, however, incur a few costs to host the podcast files out there on the internet, which is why I created a Patreon page when I finally had to move the podcast files somewhere proper. And I've got some lovely supporters there who help out for as little as £1 a month, and it really does help keep the lights on and the podcast hosted somewhere reliable and professional rather than a beat-up old Dell PC under the spare bed in the back room covered in fluff and cat hair and the bodies of my victims. Becoming a Patreon gets you my eternal gratitude, a mention on the podcast, and access to exclusive podcasts, which I intend to do more of. And as I've said before, I'm open to any suggestions from you guys. If you've got suggestions for topics, for short chats, if you've got questions you'd like me to answer, Patreon.com/Dissecting Dexter is the place to go. For £5 a month, you can be a guest on a future show. Thanks as always to those of you who support me there.
You know, after Miami, I could never get used to this damn cold.
I thought you didn't know me.
You were right.
You're listening to Dissecting Dexter.
I'm Dexter Morgan. Your father.
Okay, let's have a look at what's been put out there in the press release from Paramount Plus with Showtime. That's a mouthful. Do you think I can get away with just calling them Showtime? Old habits die hard. So, the headline has to be who is filling the very big shoes of Mr. C. Hall as our favourite serial killer. His name is Patrick Gibson. Interestingly, he's a London-born actor, and for once a Brit who didn't start their career in soaps. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything. I checked out a couple of interviews on YouTube, and he has an Irish accent, so maybe he moved to Ireland when he was very young. Seems like a nice guy, though. But can he activate the darkness in a heartbeat like we saw Michael do so many times? Presumably he can, since he's been cast in the role. You can't imagine he wouldn't be asked to do that in an audition. And I wonder if Michael himself had any input on who got the role. Patrick's been in The OA, Shadow and Bone, Tolkien, and several other films and a few TV shows, none of which I've seen, so he's a complete unknown to me, which I like. If they'd cast someone more famous, they'd come with baggage of previous roles, although that said, Michael had done 6 Feet Under, and how different was he in that? So maybe my theory's garbage, but I do like that I'm not familiar with Patrick. I really wish him well. Then we've got the role of teenage Deborah, a part that's gone to a young lady called Molly Brown, someone else I'm not familiar with, so from me, thumbs up for that too. To look at her, I can see her fitting the role physically. We'll have to see how she handles some creative F-bombs. In terms of her acting work, she's done a few bits here and there. Higher profile shows include Billions, Law and Order SVU, and The Marvellous Mrs. Maisel. I wonder if they screen tested Patrick and Molly together. You'd think so. Michael and Jennifer had such great chemistry, didn't they? It was a constant delight throughout the show. It really brought the characters and their relationship to life. Hopefully, Patrick and Molly will continue that. The third announcement is the only big name so far. Christian Slater is going to play Harry. Slater was an actor I watched a lot back when I was in my teens and early 20s. Films like Young Guns 2, Pump Up the Volume, Name of the Rose, Broken Arrow, Heathers, and True Romance. I love that film. This guy has worked constantly and always seems to be in demand, so he's a great catch for Harry. I think he'll be brilliant. The only thing is the casting calls said Harry would be about 40 years old and Slater's in his mid-50s now. But he's still got his looks, and I think he could pass for someone in their 40s, so it's all good. So we've got our 3 top-billed actors for our main 3 characters. Let me click over here and we'll see what else the press release said. Clyde Phillips will return as showrunner and executive producer. Taking place 15 years before viewers first met Dexter, this new 10-episode thriller will chronicle America's favourite serial killer in training. Okay, so Clyde is back. That's good. I know some viewers will have probably lost some faith in him with how New Blood ended, but I'm not one of them. I'm good with this. He oversaw the golden years of the original series, and he still has a massive amount of credit with me. Don't shoot me, but apart from being rushed, I'm okay with how New Blood ended. I still am. I try to keep saying in my recent rewatch podcasts, never forget this guy is a killer. He needs to kill. Without the code, he'd still kill people. I think our heads and hearts looked at the finale differently. My heart wanted him to survive, but my head knew he was a mass murderer who was going to corrupt his son. Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. I'll not pick off that scab now. Or maybe I've already done it. Oh dear. They're giving us 10 episodes. I do think less can be more. Less chance of filler, but could be more risks of rushing things, like with the end of New Blood. I still wish they'd had at least 1, maybe 2 more episodes to have more time for that huge escalation of events. So, 10 episodes, and set 15 years before the original series. Okay, so previously they'd said 20 years. Was that in the original announcement last year, or in the casting call? It certainly said 20 years in the casting call. So it's going to be 15 years, so that pretty much negates my point about Christian Slater's age. Back to Showtime's announcement. In fact, Slater's only a few years older than me, so I'm not one to... I shouldn't really be talking about age, should I? Oh dear, that's dated me. Back to Showtime's announcement. It says, set in 1991 Miami, Dexter, original sin, follows Dexter, brackets Gibson, as he transitions from student to avenging serial killer. When his bloodthirsty urges can't be ignored any longer... When his bloodthirsty urges can't be ignored any longer, Dexter must learn to channel his inner darkness. With the guidance of his father, Harry, brackets Slater, close brackets, he adopts a code in capital C, a code designed to help him find and kill people who deserve to be eliminated from society without getting on law enforcement's radar. This is a particular challenge for young Dexter as he begins a forensic internship at the Miami Metro Police Department. So, this just confirms what we knew from before, and what was inferred in the casting call, which I went into detail on the Patreon podcast. That said, that Dexter graduates top of his class and starts his professional career in Miami Metro, where we meet other familiar, albeit younger, characters, including LaGuerta, Batista, Masuka, and Tom Matthews, all of whom were on this casting call, confirming the search for new actors to play them. So, yeah, with it being 2024 now, will they be toning down the sexual jokes from Masuka? The early seasons were all pre-2010, the show began in the mid-noughties, and society has changed quite a bit since then, and I like to think most people are far more conscious of their behaviour and language and how it affects people in the workplace. It will be fascinating to see how this plays out in the new series, and I'm sure we'll be touching on it down the road. The announcement also confirms the executive producers, who include Scott Reynolds, Michael C. Hall, Mary Lee Sutton, Tony Hernandez, Lily Burns, with the series being produced by Robert Lloyd Lewis, who was involved with the original series. Reuniting with Slater is Michael Lehman, who directed him in Heathers, and Lehman serves as a directing executive producer. Lehman previously directed 2 Dexter episodes, one in Season 6 and one in Season 7. On social media, you could see how relieved and delighted Scott Reynolds was to finally be able to talk about the new series. He probably still can't say too much beyond yes, it's happening and yes, I've been writing for it. But this is good news, because Scott wrote what I think we can all agree was the best episode of New Blood. Probably one of the best episodes of the entire show, and we've got that continuity as Scott's been involved throughout in gradually increasing capacities. Elsewhere on social media, Patrick and Molly both posted on Twitter, or X or whatever, and I can see me calling it that every time. Patrick said, "Tonight's the night, can't bloody wait," while Molly posted in character, it seems, with a very fruity message. "Sorry, Mum, if you're listening," but Molly says, "I'm about to swear so fucking much on your TV. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so fucking excited." Bless her. I think she's happy. Her biggest role yet, that's for sure. For both of them, actually. They've every right to be happy and shout it from the rooftops. God love them.
I went to the church that night that you killed Travis Marshall to tell you that.
I reached out to you guys on the socials and got some good comments back. On Facebook, Axel said he's as excited for these podcasts as he is the show and will definitely be watching. Bruce Evans says he thinks they should have gone the reboot route and faithfully adapted all the books. It's the only way for it to be something different, do its own thing and differentiate itself from the OG series. He's not sure about the prequel because they've pretty much covered everything about young Dexter in flashbacks. Deanna commented on this that the books get weird. I have to admit, I've still never read the books, which is perhaps a shameful admission and a shameful hole in my fandom, but there it is. Deanna also says that so few prequels manage to do more than try to cash in on fan service, citing Better Call Saul as an exception. But she sadly says that Lumberjacks, Scott Buck and New Blood sapped most of her Dexter passion, except interacting with us here on the podcast and the online community, which is nice of her to say. Long-time contributor to listener feedback there, Deanna, as so many of you are, and I cannot wait to hear from you guys again when the show airs. I love hearing your thoughts and responding on the podcast. It is the best bit for me. Bruce raises a valid concern that I did address on the Patreon podcast. Just another plug for that. Where he says that a lot of Dexter's backstory was covered already through flashbacks in the show, and that is a concern of mine. Yeah, we've seen a lot of key points from his youth in the show already. What key moments are there still to reveal? I guess we'll find out, won't we? And I have to trust. Well, we have to trust, and I've no doubt that they've got plenty of ideas of holy shit moments and revelations to depict in the new series. Nick Henderson dropped me a line with his reaction to the news. He writes, "First and foremost, I just wanted to say how lovely it's going to be to have more Dexter to dissect in the future. I've missed our chats and hearing from other fans. I've been eager to learn more about this project since it was announced. Like many of us, I'm sure, I had some concerns. Can Dexter be as compelling without the electric performances of Michael C. Hall and Jennifer Carpenter? Given what we already know about his story, is there enough new material there to make this worthwhile? While we still have a ways to go before these questions are answered with any certainty, I'm feeling optimistic. Scott Reynolds is super excited, Clyde Phillips is at the helm, and Michael C. Hall is returning as executive producer. Hopefully it's not just an honorary title. Not to mention the lead roles have been cast, and I've got to imagine that they've all turned in some impressive auditions, because let's face it, they all have big shoes to fill. I can't wait to see them in action. There'll be plenty of time to talk at length in the weeks and months to come, so I'll keep this short for now. I think the casting announcements thus far are pretty exciting, and it's nice to finally have something tangible to set our sights on. Production is rumoured to be starting in June, so I'm sure we'll have plenty to unpack in the coming months. Thanks for that, Nick. I'm sure we will. You feel much the same way that I do, and a lot of us do. It's interesting to see Michael listed as an executive producer. How involved will he be? I got the impression he was done with the character. Is he listed as a courtesy, an honorary title as you said, or is he involved creatively? I'd love to think he watched some auditions and had some input on who got the roles, especially that of Dexter himself. Nick has written a great article on the casting news and what we know so far, and you can find it at dexterdaily.com, which is a great source of regular Dexter information, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more new stuff going up there over the coming months. And Nick will be posting more articles there in the coming months, especially when the show airs, where I suspect he'll be doing weekly reviews as well. Back on Facebook, Teresa commented that probably no one can fill Michael's shoes, but she's anxious to see what they do. Mike Wilkerson has commented, "Oh, Mike. Hey, Mike," from the Two Guys Talking podcast. "I remember you, sir. We never did get to do that joint podcast, did we? Sorry about that." But Mike asks that can we just have whatever they're going to make not suck? Which is a reasonable question, a reasonable request, and I'd settle for that too. I don't expect the second coming. I'm not setting my sights unreasonably high. But if it's fun, has a good story, some memorable kills, and most importantly for me, not just exist for existing's sake, but to have stuff to surprise us and enhance the original show and characters, not just be there for the sake of it. That'll do. That'll do for me. I think the general feeling is one of cautious optimism from what I've seen out there. Of course, there are some naysayers already, inevitably. Die-hard fans will watch regardless because it's Dexter, right? We'll be there. Will it draw in new fans to the show? Maybe. Although, I don't know, would you get something out of this if you've never seen the original series? You wouldn't have that perspective, would you? I guess would it be like watching The Phantom Menace without having seen the original Star Wars trilogy? I don't know. Anyone listening now who hated both endings of New Blood and Season 8, will you be watching? Or play the waiting game? Let it play out and see what the buzz is at the end once it's done. And then maybe watch it if people say it's good. I'm here and I'm listening. Hey, that was like Frasier, wasn't it? I'm listening. Oh, for God's sakes, Niles. I shouldn't have done that. Sorry about that. Drop me a line with any thoughts, comments, or questions or concerns. dissectingdexter@gmail.com or at dissectdexter on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it now. There's the Facebook page too. Search for Dissecting Dexter on there, or I think the URL is facebook.com/dissectingdexter. This now is only the beginning of our journey to Original Sin. Filming hasn't even started yet, but it will soon. But we've still got a long way to go before we have a show to watch. I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about between now and then. I'll also be pushing on with the rewatches, so keep your eyes on the Dissecting Dexter podcast feed, because we're definitely not going anywhere. We'll be finishing season 3, and who knows, maybe I'll even finish season 4 before Original Sin hits our screens. That's got to be doable, and I'll be so happy to finally finish what I started all those years ago in 2010. My word, how old was I then? I shudder to think, how old were any of us? Just give that a thought. How old were you when you first listened to my podcast? Yeah, there'll also hopefully be a few Patreon exclusive podcasts along the way. I'll be messaging out to Patreons when those go live, and also messaging on Facebook and Twitter or X or whatever it's called. That's 3 times I've said that now. Okay, that's it for now. We'll be back soon. Thanks for those of you who responded to me on social media this week, and just a little taste perhaps of what we've got to come. And as I say, I love interacting with you guys. That's the big highlight for me, doing these podcasts. So yes, it won't be very long before we're dissecting some more Dexter again. And until then, take care guys. Thanks for listening, and speak to you soon. Cheers.